I never thought a single note could change everything," Chloe Bennett whispered as she slipped the folded paper into the back pocket of her coat, heart racing against the chilly New York wind. The streets were empty at 2:13 a.m., the glow of streetlights reflecting off the slick asphalt like molten gold, and every step she took echoed in the deserted alleyway behind the cafe where she had spent the last 12 hours serving lattes and late-night pastries to oblivious customers. Her fingers trembled slightly, whether from the cold or the knowledge of what she was doing, she couldn't tell. The note wasn't meant for him, not exactly, but the wrong hands would always make it right. Ryan Hawthorne's office in the towering glass building across town was silent except for the faint hum of the city far below, and when he picked up the small envelope, his eyes narrowed, the color of storm clouds over Lake Michigan, intense and unreadable. Chloe didn't know that he had been watching the building cameras for weeks, scanning for any irregularity, any hint of movement in the shadows, and now her innocent mistake had thrown her into the center of a storm she didn't understand yet. She pressed herself against the brick wall, trying to calm her breath, counting each heartbeat as if it could buy her more time, the scent of wet pavement and distant coffee shops mixing with the faint tang of her own adrenaline. Her mind raced back to the last time she had been reckless, to the small choices she had always told herself were meaningless, until suddenly they weren't. The envelope, light and thin, felt like a weight she couldn't escape, and she imagined Ryan holding it, his fingers steady, the faint crease on the corner where he would have unfolded it with deliberate precision. Somewhere inside, she knew he would read her handwriting, recognize the curve of the letters, the way she looped her Gs, the way she hesitated ever so slightly before the final period. And in that moment, something shifted. Ryan's presence, even miles away, was like gravity, pulling her forward against her better judgment. She ducked into the narrow corridor between two closed storefronts, each echo of her footsteps a metronome counting down toward something she couldn't yet name, and the wind whipped her hair across her face, stinging her eyes, making her squint against the glare of neon signs buzzing faintly above. Then, a faint sound, the click of a door, almost imperceptible, but enough to make her stiffen. She imagined Ryan stepping out, tailored suit catching the dim light, shoulders squared, presence commanding without moving a muscle. The note might have been a mistake, a harmless slip in the chaos of a long night, but in his hands it became a challenge, an invitation, a declaration she hadn't anticipated. Her chest tightened, a mixture of fear and anticipation, every instinct screaming at her to turn and run, but something inside held her still, curiosity mingling with dread. She pressed her back against the wall, listening to the distant hum of traffic, imagining the world narrowing to a single point where fate and accident collided, and somewhere, far above in his office, Ryan's piercing gaze found her through the city's pulse, calculating, deliberate, as if the night itself had paused for this exact second. Chloe's thoughts scattered, trying to imagine why, how, what she could have possibly done to attract attention of someone so untouchable, someone whose name alone carried weight in whispered warnings. Her fingers curled around the edges of her coat, nails digging lightly into the fabric as she realized there was no turning back, that this small note, this tiny slip of paper, had become a thread pulling her toward a future she had never imagined. The wind carried a distant siren, a reminder that the city was alive, that life went on, indifferent to individual fears, and yet in that chaos, Ryan's presence was absolute, a silent assertion of control, of anticipation, a force that Chloe could neither escape nor fully comprehend. Each step she took forward, hesitant yet inevitable, felt like moving through honey, slow and deliberate, every sense heightened, every shadow a story, every light a signal, until finally she reached the corner where the alley opened to the wider street, neon signs reflecting in puddles like shards of broken glass. The note burned in her pocket, heavy with consequences she couldn't yet see, and she knew, with the deep, sinking certainty of someone about to cross an unseen boundary, that the moment Ryan read it, the world would tilt, and nothing would ever be the same again. Chloe Bennett walked faster now, her heels clicking against the wet concrete as if each step could outrun the anticipation coiling in her stomach. The streetlights above flickered, casting brief shadows that danced across the brick walls of the alley, and she pressed herself against the corner, peering toward the main avenue where the first buses of the morning were beginning their rounds. She could feel the note pressing against her back, its edges crumpled slightly from her grip, and every instinct screamed that someone had already seen it, that someone had taken notice in a way she could not yet measure. Across town, Ryan Hawthorne moved with precise calculation through the hallways of his office tower, the hum of fluorescent lights blending with the soft click of polished shoes on marble floors, and he held the note in his hand like a key to a puzzle he had been waiting to solve. His mind was a lattice of strategy, weighing options, possibilities, and potential consequences, yet there was an unmistakable focus on the sender, the one who had unwittingly drawn him into her orbit. Chloe paused at the curb, taking in the street before her, noticing the early morning vendors setting up their carts, the smell of roasting coffee beans mingling with the dampness of the air, and she realized the city had begun its day oblivious to the drama unfolding in this quiet intersection. Her fingers tightened around the note, and she considered whether she could simply return to her apartment, slip inside, and pretend nothing had happened, but she knew better. The weight of inevitability pressed down, subtle but insistent. She began to walk, each movement deliberate, her senses alert to the softest sound, the smallest movement in the shadows. The subway entrance loomed ahead, and she descended the steps two at a time, the echo of her shoes on metal amplifying her pulse. Ryan, in his office high above the streets, had already placed a call, and a discreet observation team began their route, ensuring nothing could occur unnoticed, the note serving as a silent catalyst for a sequence of events neither Chloe nor he could fully predict. As she reached the platform, the screech of the arriving train sent a shiver through her, the vibrations rattling through the soles of her shoes and up her legs, and she gripped the railing tightly, the note still in her coat pocket. A man in a tailored black coat stepped lightly onto the platform, the reflection of the lights catching the edges of his hair, dark against the pale hue of his skin, and Chloe felt a pull, a gravity she could not explain, drawing her attention. Her heart raced as the doors opened, and she stepped inside the train, the scent of wet coats and early commuters filling the small car, yet the presence of anticipation lingered, palpable, almost tangible, like electricity in the air before a storm. Ryan watched the city awaken below, noting her patterns, timing, and movements, understanding that a single action, a single slip of paper, could ripple through the lives of many, and he allowed himself a measured moment of satisfaction, the edges of the note pressing into his palm, a reminder that control could be exercised without overt force. Chloe sat, gripping the pole, eyes darting briefly to the reflection in the window, wondering if fate had chosen her or if she had chosen it herself, unaware that every movement was being tracked, analyzed, and anticipated. The train rattled along the tracks, a steady rhythm that mirrored her own racing pulse, and for a fleeting moment, she allowed herself to imagine normalcy, a life untouched by the unseen hands shaping her path. Yet the tension remained, a subtle hum beneath every thought, every breath, and as the train curved into the next station, she sensed that the simple act of delivering a note had already set a chain in motion, one from which there could be no retreat, and far above the city, Ryan knew this, the note now a tangible link binding them both to a story neither had yet fully written. The subway rattled as Chloe Bennett held onto the cold metal pole, her knuckles white against the painted surface, the note still hidden safely in her coat pocket. The rhythmic clatter of the train wheels echoed in the tunnel, blending with the distant hum of morning traffic beginning above ground. She watched the reflection in the window, her green eyes tracing the shifting shapes of passengers standing, seated, lost in their own worlds, unaware of the invisible thread pulling her closer to an event she could not yet foresee. The city above stirred to life, the scent of freshly baked bread from a nearby bakery drifting faintly down through the stairwells and into the station, mingling with the faint metallic tang of the tracks and the sharp aroma of rain lingering from the early hours. Chloe felt the tight coil of anxiety in her stomach loosen slightly with the train's motion, though her heart still raced with the uncertainty of what the note might trigger. Ryan Hawthorne, high above in his corner office, observed her progress through discrete cameras and monitors, his posture composed, a calm precision radiating from him as he noted every gesture, every pause, every micro-expression of uncertainty. Each step Chloe took, each adjustment of her coat, was catalogued, the subtle tension in her shoulders, the way her eyes flicked to the window, and the brief hesitation at the edge of the platform, all details that would inform the next moves, the choreography of a situation unfolding with meticulous care. Chloe imagined that Ryan knew the city as she did, that he understood the labyrinth of streets, the patterns of commuters, the hidden shortcuts between avenues, and she realized in a fleeting moment that he would be ready for anything she tried, yet there was no malice in that readiness, only an expectation, an authority that made the world itself seem to bend toward his will. The doors of the train opened at the next station, and she stepped carefully onto the platform, boots clicking against the tile as she followed the flow of people ascending the staircases, the cold wind brushing against her face, ruffling strands of hair across her eyes. She kept her pace steady, measured, yet every nerve in her body was alert, a silent awareness of being watched. Assessed, anticipated, though she could not pinpoint by whom. A small café loomed ahead, the smell of roasted coffee beans and pastries stronger here, a subtle warmth emanating from inside, inviting, grounding, a contrast to the tension twisting her stomach. She hesitated at the threshold, glancing back over her shoulder, half expecting to see a shadow she could not identify, a figure appearing from the streets, but the city remained indifferent, alive, and unknowing. Inside, she found a momentary sanctuary in the low hum of conversation, the clink of cups, the comforting aroma that reminded her of ordinary mornings she had once taken for granted, and she let her shoulders relax fractionally, though the pulse of anticipation remained. In his office, Ryan made a subtle adjustment to a monitor, his gaze lingering, sharp, calculating, and though he did not move from his chair, there was a sense of readiness, a taut energy that stretched across the city like an unseen thread connecting him to the woman who had unwittingly captured his attention. Chloe ordered a coffee, the warmth of the cup seeping into her hands, anchoring her briefly in the mundane, yet she felt the weight of possibility pressing around her, the knowledge that a single note, a single unintended message, had the power to reshape her day, her choices, and in ways she could not yet imagine, the life she thought she controlled. The city carried on outside, the morning sun beginning to cut through the gray clouds, reflecting off skyscrapers, puddles, and rain-soaked streets, while inside, the quiet anticipation between what had been done and what was about to unfold stretched taut, every second a measured beat in a rhythm she could feel but not yet define. Chloe Bennett sipped her coffee slowly, the warmth seeping into her palms, grounding her against the whirlwind of thoughts racing through her mind. The café was beginning to fill with early morning patrons, the soft murmur of conversation and the gentle clatter of cups against saucers creating a rhythm that contrasted with the tight coil of anticipation she carried within her chest. She traced the rim of her cup with a fingertip, watching reflections ripple across the glossy surface of the table, imagining how her movements might appear to someone observing from a distance, the subtle rise and fall of her shoulders, the careful attention to posture, the slight hesitation before she lifted the cup to her lips. Outside, the city was alive, the streets slick with remnants of overnight rain, sunlight glinting off puddles and windshields alike, but the movement of people and vehicles seemed distant, muted by the weight of the note still hidden in her coat pocket. Ryan Hawthorne observed through layers of monitors, a quiet intensity in his gaze as he noted the careful measures Chloe took, the micro-adjustments that betrayed her awareness of being watched, and yet he did not move, allowing her the illusion of freedom while maintaining the silent thread of control that tethered her presence to his attention. The barista called out names, and Chloe responded automatically, her voice steady, practiced, concealing the quickened beat of her heart, each syllable measured, each gesture deliberate, yet beneath the veneer of normalcy, tension coiled tightly, ready to snap at the slightest provocation. She glanced at the window again, catching a fragment of motion on the street beyond, a passerby hurrying past with an umbrella, and she realized in that moment that everything had changed, that her single action, a slip of paper, had set into motion a series of events that would ripple far beyond her understanding. The warmth of the cafe, the smell of freshly ground coffee beans, the soft hum of conversation, offered a temporary reprieve, yet the pulse of anticipation remained, a subtle undercurrent threading through her senses, heightening every sound, every reflection, every shadow. She considered the day ahead, the errands she had planned, the meetings and the mundane interactions, and yet none of it seemed ordinary anymore. Each step, each glance, each decision carried a weight she could not yet measure, a significance she had not anticipated. The city outside moved on, indifferent, while inside, every detail, every nuance of her behavior was part of a story unfolding silently, meticulously, with consequences that would reveal themselves in time. Chloe rested her hands lightly on the table, letting the warmth of the cup calm her, drawing her focus inward, but the sensation was fleeting, replaced immediately by the awareness that her life had shifted, that unseen eyes and careful calculations were now part of the landscape of her day, that every choice she made, every movement, would be noted, measured, and responded to. Ryan's office remained quiet, the city below unaware of the tension suspended high above, the faint glow of monitors illuminating his face, reflecting the subtle precision with which he had orchestrated observation, the calm yet inexorable attention to detail that ensured nothing could occur outside his knowledge. Chloe lifted her gaze to the ceiling, the pale sunlight filtering through the large windows, catching the edges of her hair and casting soft shadows across her face, and she felt the simultaneous weight of anticipation and curiosity, a delicate balance between apprehension and the unknown possibilities that lay ahead, knowing that the day had already begun to unfold along a path she could not yet see, yet was inevitably part of. Chloe Bennett stepped out of the cafe, the early morning sun casting long golden streaks across the wet pavement, the warmth on her skin contrasting sharply with the chill lingering in the air from the overnight rain. She adjusted her coat, feeling the slight weight of the note still tucked safely in her pocket, a reminder of the choice that had already begun to shape her day. The city was awakening, honking horns, the distant wail of a siren, and the steady rhythm of footsteps on sidewalks creating a symphony of normalcy that made her own pulse feel sharper by comparison. As she walked toward the bus stop, she noticed the reflection of herself in the glass storefronts, green eyes wide with a mixture of apprehension and resolve, and she could not help but wonder how a single slip of paper could carry such significance. Ryan Hawthorne, from his office high above the streets, observed through layers of cameras, his gaze steady, calculating, a quiet intensity radiating from him as he tracked her every movement, noting the way her coat shifted with each step, the slight hesitation before crossing streets, the careful adjustments of her bag against her shoulder. Chloe reached the intersection and paused, letting the flow of traffic guide her across, feeling the vibration of tires against asphalt through her shoes, a subtle reminder of the city's pulse beneath her. She kept her eyes forward, noting each figure in her periphery, every pedestrian moving with purpose, oblivious to the tension threading through her morning. The note had been intended as a simple message, but now it was a catalyst, a force she could not yet measure, its presence altering her perception, sharpening her senses, making ordinary sounds and movements seem charged with potential consequence. As she stepped onto the bus, the familiar scent of worn leather seats and faint traces of coffee enveloped her, grounding her even as the anticipation tightened in her chest. Ryan watched from above, allowing her the sense of normalcy while maintaining a silent watch, the delicate balance between observation and influence palpable in the way he allowed her to proceed, ready to intervene if the situation shifted. Chloe found a seat near the window, her reflection overlapping with the city outside, sunlight glinting off glass buildings, puddles reflecting fractured pieces of the skyline, and she let her hands rest lightly on her knees, the warmth of the morning contrasting with the lingering weight of her thoughts. The hum of the bus blended with the rhythm of the streets, a constant undercurrent that mirrored the quickening of her pulse, and she became aware of every detail, the creak of the door as it opened at each stop, the subtle scent of fresh pastries from a vendor on the corner, the soft murmur of fellow passengers speaking quietly. Ryan adjusted a monitor, his focus absolute, noting her attentiveness, her subtle reactions, the way she shifted when someone passed too close, the minute gestures that betrayed awareness and caution. Chloe glanced out the window, city blocks passing in a blur, the horizon stretching into a pale blue sky, and she realized with a sinking certainty that the note, her momentary lapse, had drawn her into a story unfolding beyond her comprehension, connecting her to a presence she could feel but not see, a careful orchestration of attention, anticipation, and subtle influence that would shape her day and perhaps far more than she had anticipated. The bus continued its route, the gentle sway and quiet murmur of movement grounding her, yet every sense remained heightened, attuned to possibilities, to the unseen, and to the silent gravity that had begun to orbit her life in ways she could not yet fully understand. Chloe Bennett stepped off the bus, the city streets now fully awake with morning energy, the sun reflecting off the glass of skyscrapers and the wet asphalt in golden streaks. Her footsteps echoed against the sidewalks as she navigated through clusters of commuters, briefcases and coffee in hand, unaware of the silent thread that followed her from above. She adjusted the strap of her bag, feeling the slight weight of the note pressing against her side, a reminder of the unseen force it had invoked, and her pulse quickened, not with fear but with the sharp awareness of being part of something larger than herself. Ryan Hawthorne observed from the office tower, the monitors reflecting the patterns of movement below, noting the small hesitations, the careful avoidance of eye contact with strangers, the way she paused at street corners, checking traffic and her surroundings, all under the pretense of morning routine. Chloe ducked into a small park for a moment, the cool breeze rustling leaves around her, and she felt the city breathe around her, the distant sound of joggers, dogs, and the faint hum of traffic creating a rhythm that grounded her yet made her acutely aware of her own heartbeat. She found a bench, settling into the brief calm, and allowed herself to exhale slowly, taking in the sunlight warming her face, the faint smell of fresh grass and earth, and the distant aroma of bakery goods drifting from nearby storefronts. The note, once a simple slip of paper, now felt heavier with implication, each fold and crease a silent testimony to the unintended consequences it carried. Ryan's attention remained fixed, analyzing her posture, her glances, the subtle signs of thought and emotion, the invisible cues that suggested a mind actively processing more than it revealed, and he allowed the observation to continue, a quiet, patient study of the intricate dance between action and consequence. Chloe's thoughts flickered between mundane plans for the day and the persistent awareness that something had shifted in her world, that the small act she had taken was now a pivot point she could not reverse. She rose from the bench, the morning sunlight painting her shadow long and thin on the pathway, and continued along the park's edge, careful to navigate puddles, the subtle splashes grounding her to the present even as anticipation tightened around her chest. Her phone buzzed softly in her bag, a minor disruption in the ambient sounds of the city, and she glanced down to see a message she had not expected, a simple line of text, devoid of context but heavy with implication, making her pause mid-step and glance up at the streets around her, half expecting to see a presence she could not name. Ryan monitored every subtle shift, noting her micro-reactions, her fleeting hesitations, the way her shoulders tensed and relaxed in response, the rhythm of her breathing, and he made no move, allowing the tension to stretch taut while maintaining complete awareness of her location and direction. Chloe continued on, weaving through street traffic, the sense of roasted coffee, baking bread, and faint exhaust mingling in the air, each step deliberate, measured, yet underlined with the awareness of an unseen observer whose influence was silent yet pervasive. The city, with its honking cars, chatter, and clatter, seemed to recede slightly around her, the world narrowing to the space she occupied, the note a silent compass, and the anticipation of what might unfold tightening around her awareness, drawing her forward into a narrative she had not written but was inexorably part of, her every movement threaded into a sequence she could only sense, not yet understand. Chloe Bennett approached the entrance to the high-rise where her meeting was scheduled, the morning sun reflecting off the polished glass doors in a way that made her pause. Briefly, adjusting her coat and straightening the strap of her bag as if preparing herself for more than a routine appointment. The streets around her were alive with the rhythm of the city, the distant chatter of pedestrians, the faint hum of delivery trucks, and the intermittent honk of taxis creating a constant soundtrack, yet she felt the subtle tension that had been following her all morning, the weight of anticipation pressing lightly against her shoulders. She took a deep breath, the scent of freshly brewed coffee from a nearby cafe mixing with the faint tang of the concrete and asphalt warmed by the rising sun, grounding her even as her mind raced through possible scenarios of what could come next. Ryan Hawthorne observed from his office above, his posture calm but his attention unwavering, noting the precise moments of hesitation in her gait, the way her eyes scanned the surroundings with heightened awareness, the delicate adjustments of her bag and coat, each movement catalogued, analyzed, and understood in the context of the unfolding sequence. Chloe pushed through the revolving doors, the faint resistance of the mechanism a subtle reminder of the transition from the public street into the controlled environment of the building, the cool air conditioning brushing against her skin and shifting the texture of her thoughts, sharpening her focus on the steps ahead. She made her way to the elevator, pressing the button for the floor she had memorized from the appointment details, the faint chime and soft hum of the cab creating a rhythm that mirrored the quickening of her pulse, each floor passing in a blur as her reflection in the mirrored walls shifted slightly with the movement, her green eyes meeting her own gaze, alert, measuring, aware. The doors opened, and she stepped onto the polished marble floor, the sound of her shoes echoing softly in the expansive lobby, the scent of polished stone and indoor plants mingling with the faint aroma of leather and paper from office furnishings, creating a sense of place both grounding and heightened in its sensory detail. Chloe walked toward the reception desk, each step deliberate, the subtle sway of her coat matching the cadence of her heartbeat, and she handed over her identification, feeling the small tremor of excitement and uncertainty mingling in her chest. Ryan adjusted a monitor from his office, noting her interactions, the careful composure she maintained, the fleeting micro-expressions that revealed the underlying tension, and allowed the observation to continue without intrusion, a quiet orchestration that guided the unfolding narrative while giving her the sense of agency. Chloe moved past the lobby, toward the suite where the meeting was set to occur, the light filtering through large windows casting soft patterns on the floor, highlighting the careful lines of her movements, the attentive glances, the measured pace as she navigated the corridor, each sensory detail intensifying the tension in a way she could feel but not yet articulate. She reached the door, paused for a moment, her hand hovering over the handle, and allowed herself a controlled exhale, the weight of the morning, the note, and the unseen attention coalescing into a concentrated awareness that drew her forward, aware that the next moments would define a trajectory she had not foreseen, and yet could not avoid, the subtle pulse of anticipation threading through her every thought and movement as she stepped inside. Chloe Bennett stepped into the bright, open room, the sunlight streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows illuminating the subtle patterns in the marble floor and the sleek lines of modern furniture arranged with quiet precision. She felt the warmth of the morning sun on her face, a comforting contrast to the lingering tension that coiled in her chest, and she adjusted her coat, the slight pressure of the note in her pocket reminding her that the morning's events were far from ordinary. The faint hum of the air conditioning blended with the soft murmur of distant traffic below, creating a steady, grounding rhythm as she moved toward a seat near the center of the room, her green eyes scanning the space, noting the subtle cues of placement, light, and shadow, absorbing every detail as if each held significance. Ryan Hawthorne watched from a side alcove, partially concealed by the light and reflections from the windows, his posture composed, his expression unreadable yet intensely focused, noting the careful, deliberate movements of Chloe as she settled herself. She shifted slightly, crossing and uncrossing her legs, brushing a strand of hair from her face, and the careful, subconscious gestures revealed the measured balance she maintained between composure and the underlying anticipation that hummed in her chest. The note, though hidden, exerted a silent presence, a tether linking her attention to unseen eyes, and she could feel its influence in the subtle quickening of her pulse, the way her breath deepened, the slight tension in her shoulders, the attentive sweep of her gaze across the room. Outside, the city moved in its usual rhythm, taxis honking, footsteps echoing against sidewalks, the occasional distant siren, all blending into a background soundtrack that made her feel both ordinary and acutely aware of her own presence, each sensation amplified by the quiet awareness that she was part of a carefully observed sequence. Ryan's focus remained on the micro details, the angle of her head, the cadence of her breathing, the momentary pauses in her movement, the gentle adjustments of her bag on her shoulder, each element catalogued and understood in the context of the unfolding narrative, a silent orchestration that ensured her awareness, her choices, and her reactions were measured against possibilities yet to unfold. Chloe's hands rested lightly on her lap, the warmth from her coffee cup lingering in her palms, grounding her, and she allowed herself a slow exhale, the soft inhale following, a small meditation in the midst of tension, each motion deliberate, each thought sharpened by anticipation. She looked toward the window, noticing the interplay of sunlight and shadows across the room, the subtle reflections catching on surfaces, and she realized the quiet intensity of the morning had changed the perception of her environment, making every corner, every object, every reflection seem alive with possibility, charged by the unseen connection she had initiated with the note. The room remained silent except for the ambient city hum, a perfect stage for awareness, observation, and subtle interaction, and Chloe felt the balance between ordinary routine and extraordinary circumstance stretching taut around her, a tension she could sense but could not yet fully interpret, knowing with an underlying certainty that the moments ahead would define the trajectory of the day, the choices she would make, and the unseen forces guiding the space around her, each second a measured beat in a story that was only beginning to reveal itself. Chloe Bennett rose from her seat, the subtle warmth of the coffee still lingering in her hands, and moved toward the window, her reflection merging with the cityscape beyond, the streets alive with motion, sunlight dancing off glass and steel, illuminating puddles from the early morning rain in fractured patterns that caught her eye. Her thoughts spun with the weight of the morning's unfolding events, the simple note now a silent catalyst, and she felt the pull of anticipation tighten around her chest, a quiet reminder of the unseen influence she had set into motion. Ryan Hawthorne observed from above, his posture composed, the soft hum of the office blending with the distant sound of the city, each movement of Chloe catalogued with precision, her shifts, her glances, the measured cadence of her steps all feeding into a meticulous understanding of the moment. Chloe pressed a hand against the window, feeling the cool glass, grounding herself in the physical world as her mind traced the invisible threads connecting her to the morning's actions and the presence she could sense but had yet to fully meet. The city carried on outside, taxis weaving through avenues, pedestrians moving with purpose, the faint scent of baking bread and coffee wafting from nearby cafés mingling with the clean crisp air, and she breathed in slowly, feeling the steady rhythm of the streets synchronize with the quickened beat of her pulse. She turned from the window and began to pace lightly, her footsteps quiet against the marble floor, the note in her coat pocket a constant, subtle weight, a reminder of the chain of events already set into motion. Ryan's attention remained focused, noting the subtlest signs of awareness, the micro-adjustments in posture, the flicker of expression that revealed engagement, curiosity, and tension, all without intervention, allowing the tension to stretch while maintaining complete control over the observation. Chloe paused mid-step, considering her next move, the balance between ordinary routine and the extraordinary undercurrents surrounding her creating a sharp focus in her mind, each decision deliberate, measured, each breath synchronized with the beat of the city outside. She walked toward the edge of the room, past furniture arranged with calculated precision, noting light and shadow, the warmth of sun on the floor, the subtle reflection of glass, the quiet hum of electronics, all combining to create an environment that felt both ordinary and charged, each sensory detail amplifying her awareness. The note, simple and folded, pressed slightly against her hip, a tangible reminder of choices made and consequences unseen, and she realized the morning had altered the rhythm of her life, creating a tether she could feel but not yet trace, pulling her forward toward events she could not yet predict. Ryan made a slight adjustment to a monitor, the soft glow illuminating his expression, noting her glance toward the corner of the room, the subtle shifts in weight as she moved, the delicate interplay between curiosity and caution, all feeding into a careful mapping of her presence. Chloe exhaled slowly, letting the momentary calm settle while remaining alert, the city outside, the room around her, and the invisible tension threading through the space blending into a singular awareness, and she knew, with an unspoken certainty, that each step she took from this point forward would be both observed and consequential, part of a story she had unwittingly become central to, the morning unfolding toward a nexus she could sense but not yet define.